The One Piece! The One Piece is real!
Heya, I'm Zilxari, and welcome to my wonderful whimsical world. Now, if you're like me, we avoided One Piece like hot fire because that thing is over 1,000 episodes and still going. But a little goblin convinced me to start watching it last year. Shushu got me hooked, and that's how I disappeared off the face of the earth for the next few months. Taking a prepared doll from my chaos cupboard, this Draculaura is going to be transformed into, you guessed it, UTA. She already had her factory paint removed with 100% acetone, and old scrungly hair snip snop chopped and scooped out to provide a blank canvas. I hate doing this and generally do it in batches so I can get straight to the fun part. We all know if one piece is out of place, then it's lost to time. Using 2-part epoxy clay and water for smoothing, I sculpt on some badonkadonkas and give her some support for that lordosis she got going on there. Once dry, she gets sanded, cleaned, and sprayed with a coat of MSC, aka Super Mr. Clear. I try and match the skin tone with some acrylic paint, initially making it a bit too dark, but then getting pretty close the second time round. Making the hair was a bit of a nightmare because I prefer using nylons over yarn. To me, it just looks a bit more like natural hair. The only downside is it's a lot harder to get it to hold funky shapes. I tried a few different methods but found that using some translucent fishing line worked the best. You could probably just use some red thread, to be honest. It would be much easier to work with, but I just stuck with the fishing line. I prepared hair wefts using some PVA glue and letting it dry overnight. Selecting a thicker weft to wrap around the reroot tool. I tied in place with some fishing line and used some Maspa, aka multi-purpose glue, to keep everything in place. Another piece of fishing line is used to tie the bottom to keep its shape, and any excess is snip-snop off, trying to hide that knot in the hair loop. Then rinse and repeat with a slightly larger loop, aka a loopty, and then a hella big boy. Making sure glue gets all over your fingers everywhere, that is definitely the most essential part. Indeed. Fun fact! One Piece Film Red is the 15th One Piece movie, which was released in commemoration of 1,000 episodes. Split the loopty into 2 at the bottom, add glue to the first little loop, and shove it in the middle, squishing him in place, tying with some more fishing line to make sure he ain't going anywhere. Hindsight? Using a longer weft and not cutting off the excess from the loopty would be a much better method, because then you don't have to reattach a weft and try and wrap a shiitake ton of fish line to keep it in place, like I did. Using a handy dandy mini straightener, the ends of each weft were prepped so that the glue part could be bent and hidden away. Layering one weft on top of another to build volume until it somewhat resembles Uta's loop-de-doop-de pigtails. The reason you want to glue the top of the weft to the bottom of the pigtail is to give the illusion that there is more hair at the bottom of the loopty tail. Keeping it folded over pushes the hair outwards to give it extra volume at the bottom. Pulling and twisting tight at the top also helps create that volume difference. Then, we copy, flip, duplicate, turn up the brightness to full and saturation to 0, boom! We have another loopty tail in white. I was testing how I wanted to make the rest of her hair and settled on making a wig cap. To do this, I used some cling wrap to cover her face, then layered some fabric and tied it with a rubber band. I drew a rough line as to where I wanted the hairline and covered it with some PVA, letting it dry overnight. Once dry, I removed it from her head and cut it into shape, leaving half white and painting the other half red with acrylic paint. It's the same process on both sides, the only difference is the colour and the length of the front. Starting with the fringe, I glued some wefts on the inside of the cap and moved my way down, pulling larger wefts up to the part line and forward toward the front, trimming any excess. Don't be me. Make sure to test the wig as you go to fit and style. I didn't do this often enough and cut a little too much from the left side of her fringe, which I would have liked to be a little bit more wispy. The final fringe piece is a folded weft I glue directly on top to hide any glue that may still be showing. Ah, my lovely paper scrap pattern. I don't have the patience to make proper patterns, so we're gonna use this janky one. Not that it does much, but I traced the pattern onto some fabric and cut out the 2 pieces. I need to buy some sewing pins, but luckily I have some safety pins in my stash, which I use to pin both sides together before painstakingly hand sewing the sides. The fabric was a little thicker than I thought, so I had to use a thimble to help push the needle through. Learning from my Wigsident, I made sure to try on the dress after each step. Spoilers, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. The back is a little bit different from the original to allow space for her wings, and to make it easier to close up the back. Folding the fabric under her arms, I pin them in place, checking the fabric still meets in the middle. The length of the dress was a little bit too long, so I measured it just above the knees, marking on both sides. I cut the excess and hand sewed all the pinned areas. Small straps were also added to connect the back of the dress to the front. I carved some holes in the back, making sure I had enough space for her wings. Then I gathered 3 strips of fabric, 2 for the sleeves and 1 for the neck. These were trimmed and sealed with masper as they were a little bit too small for me and my fumbly fingers. Fun fact! Secret Agent Panda Man has appeared 306 times in One Piece as of checking this fact. The neck got a clickety-mickety button, and the back of the dress got some beads that I could hook into small fabric hoops that I sewed down the side. I made a tiny bow out of the extra ribbon that sometimes comes on the inside of the clothing to hang it. I cut it to size and sealed it with some more masper. I couldn't find any buttons that were small enough, so I ended up using these cute little black nail art gemstones. In order to do this, I marked the spots where I wanted to glue everything on to make sure the spacing was right, and then dabbed some glue on the back of the gemstones and the ribbon to stick them down. For the sleeves, I cut out some light blue fabric and some elastic, measuring it around her arm, gluing the elastic ends to stop them from fraying, and then sewing it together. I thought it'd be easier to sew directly on the doll arm, but was struggling, so I ended up just taking it off and sewing it from there. Measure the sleeve. Don't be me. I have to detach the arm to put the sleeve on because the fabric is not stretch fabric. Otherwise, you could just use some stretch fabric. The sleeve was flipped and the elastic added to the top of the sleeve, hemming both sides. To make a subtle gradient, I used a pastel blue wannabe Coptic marker and some isopropanol to smooth the transition. For the little hat, I used some Warbler. I haven't really used it before, but I thought it would work well, and it does. I cut out a little square, heated it up, and curved it so it would sit a little bit better at the front. Colouring it in with a yellow marker before drawing a teeny tiny little hat with some pencil. Going back with black for outlines and cherry pink for the little hat blib. Take 1. I wasn't really happy with the readability, so I made it again and cut it out of its little square. I went to glue it on and...
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Realized I had the writing backwards, so I made another 2, and to be honest, the second one is still the best one, so I'm a little peeved. But the 4th one I made was acceptable, so I just glued it on at this point. Gotta make some booties! I found some boots which matched Uta's pretty well. The only problem is they weren't meant for heeled feet, so they were a little bit difficult to adjust. I carved off the original detailing and stuck a foam support at the heel. I used some 2-part epoxy to smooth the boot, but looking back, Warbler is probably a bit more flexible and might have been a better choice at preventing cracking. To make the circular decor, I used a big boy sequin for reference and some foam to add volume. Cutting another strip of foam on an angle to wrap around the elevated sequin, then copy paste twice, sticking one on the front of the toe of the boot and the other 2 near the ankle regions. Fun fact! Uta is voiced by Kaori, Nazuka and Ado in Japanese, and Amanda Lee in the English version. I opted in using some fabric to add detailing, adding a strip to the front, one that wraps around a circular blib across the back of the shoe around the other blib, and one at the back that I initially miss but go in and add later. With a larger bit of fabric, I glue a fold to hide the seam, stick it at the neck of the shoe, and shove that extra bit of fabric into the shoe. Then copy paste flip. I covered the shoes in Plastidip. It says 3 to 4 coats on average, waiting 30 minutes between each spray, but I ended up doing 6 coats to try and make it look smooth. I should have primed it, but I ended up just going in straight with white acrylic paints. Making sure I got the camera out of focus, I went in with yellow on the outer circle blibs. Next was the red, painting the inside of the circular blibs, the decorative lines, and the bottom of the shoes. I made a quick wing template which I traced on some thick foam and cut it out. The template is a little thinner to accommodate for the extra material, as I didn't have the right thickness of foam, so the wings are a little bit on the bulky side. I go in with some foam clay, initially covering the whole wing and smoothing out the base layer. Once happy, I moved on to the little wing frills, starting at the bottom row by creating a little bauble from the foam clay, pressing it down on the top half and pulling away any excess. This was repeated all the way to the base of the wing, then twice again a layer up with slightly smaller amounts each time to make a total of 3 rows. A chunky wormy boy is draped across the top section of the wing, and that's the front done. For the back of the wing, it's the same technique, except the little baubles are about 1/3 of the size, with 3 sets of 4, 2 along the bottom and 1 on the top. I go back in with some water to smooth out the clay as much as I can and let it dry before giving it 6 coats of Plastidip. Honestly, it could have gone with more, but I was way too impatient. Since this is the right wing, we are going in with some yellow paint. These paints are really cheap acrylic from the kids section, but they have this cool iridescent shine, so I was determined to use them. I mixed some white with yellow and boom! 12 coats later and she be yellow. Duplicate, flip and color change to pink to get the left wing. I also had to remove the toothpicks and change the angle for them to face forward so the wings would sit a little bit better on the back. Woot woot! Time for face up! The whole body was sprayed with a layer of MSC before I got started. I went in with 2 types of watercolor pencils to lay down the general shape. White for the scleras, a mix of purple and magenta for the iris, a little bit of magenta for the lips, and black for the eyelids, eye crease and eyebrow. Trying to keep the lines around the eye minimal, similar to anime style. 2 notes. Sharpen the goddamn pencil, girl! And trust the process. It'll be fine. It'll be fine and dandy. To blush the body and the face, I used a combination of yellow and blue to tone down the original pink color of the skin, and only bring in pink near the cheeks and the joints. Fun fact! Sanji's original name was meant to be Naruto. However, since Naruto started the same year in 1997, the author Oda changed the name in respect of his friends. They are old as my human form. What a coinkydink! After another layer of MSC, I go back in with some more traditional styled watercolor paint. I find them easier to use with brushes and the color builds up quicker. Also, MSC is pricey and kinda hard to find in Australia, so you know. Going through the same process, scleras first with white watercolor, pink for the outer bottom edge of the iris, and purple at the top middle of the iris. The purple was quite dark, so I tried my best to create a nice transition between the purple and the pink, which was a lot brighter. Once satisfied, I added in a few purple lines moving from the center of the eye outward and added some black pupils. I find it really hard to paint eyelashes and make them look good, especially when it's not on a flat surface. I was in the way of the camera when I started recording the eyelashes. Luckily, I noticed and fixed that. I slowly followed the outline I put down with the pencils with black and then using light brown for the eye crease. Boom! 2 eyes! Editing magic, and definitely not because I kept getting my face in the way of the camera. I added 4 eye shines, 1 big boy in the top corner of the iris, 2 little boys at the bottom opposite side, and 1 itty bitty bean under the big boy. I blended the right side because the eye shines should technically be on the same side as the iris, but it's okay. All my hard work on the right side is gonna get covered by Uta's fringe. It's our little secret. Shh. To soften the eyebrows, I put a layer of light brown pastels and a smidge of red toward the intersection. Also adding some red pastels to the lips while I have them cracked open again. I should have added a layer of MSC, but I risked it for the biscuit and added tiny little brown and red lines of watercolor for the eyebrows. She looks like she's making a cute cheeky expression with the right eyebrow, which will be covered up. Why? Why do I do this to myself? I also added some itty bitty red lines to the lips and some white highlights. Now that Uta has a face, we can cover up that lovely left eye of hers. Fortunately, we also get to hide those ears that were sliced off by her previous owner. So who's winning now? She'll get her cyber headset ears soon enough. I didn't want her hair sliding out of place, so I decided to glue it on with some handy dandy masper, spreading that good sticky stuff everywhere and sliding it on like a swimming cap. I adjusted it until I was happy with the positioning at the front, and then waited for it to dry. I was running out of the fast dry glue, so I had to use the forbidden hot plastic juice to stick the loop details on. To reinforce them, I added a pin in the middle and snipped off the excess. The back also got some extra tufts so they would peek out from the bottom of the headset. I pre-measured 1 piece of foam and cut it out with rounded edges, using the forbidden glue to stick it down, trying my best to hide any seam lines. I did mention they're a cyber headset, right? That's why they're attached to her head. Yes. I cut out some extra bits to stick at the front to provide some extra support. Using some foam clay, I smooth out any connecting points, making sure to avoid getting it in her hair at all costs. I'm telling you, foam sticks to hair strands like a leech. To make the ear mufflets, I cut out 4 circles, 2 which were slightly smaller, and an extra strip of foam. Wrapping the rectangular bit around the larger circle to make an open-ended cylinder, placing the smaller circle on top of the bigger one so it sticks out a little bit. To try and smooth the ear mufflets, I covered them with some foam clay and a few layers of plastic. For the big boy, I started off with 2 coats of white acrylic. 1, I didn't want to risk getting glue or Plastidip in her hair if I tried priming it, and 2, having the white underneath will make the yellow a little brighter and more consistent. Once dry, I went back in with yellow for the base and the ear mufflets. I eyeballed where the middle of the base was and drew a faint line with some blue pencil, going back in with a few layers of white to bring out the light blue. I'm pretty sure if I would have gone straight in with the blue on the yellow, it would have looked green since the blues that I have are kind of meh quality. Then repeating the same process with the ear mufflets. Trying to make a glowish effect, I used some blue pastels, which I wasn't super happy about, so you know what we do? We add some glitter, yes! The answer to all of my problems! Yes. Once glitterified, the ear mufflets are stuck on and Uta's cyber headset is done. Just gotta glue on those wings that we prepared earlier and ta-da! The clue has been bestowed on you as to what part 2 of the project may be. Let me know who you think it could be in the comments. I hope you enjoyed our crafty times together. feel free to join the forest. I'd love to hang out some more. Hope to see you looming around. Bye! I pre-measured one piece and covered it in with PVA to drive overnight? Vroom vroom! Until it somewhat resembles UTA's. Volume until it somewhat resembles UTA's. Bruh. To make a subtle, we add some glitter. We add glitter. We add some glitter. Yes, the answer to all my problems. Sparklies. Covered in traced on some chunky wormy boy is baubles, but sit back, outer bottom and purple bush, life toss, back, the front provide it's to water for some using Masper, aka multi with a slight extra ribbon and then curved to make this circular. Cut out some extra big fuck.